Hello everyone. Today we're going to go check out Azure Private Link. This is an important concept from Azure Security and Azure Networking, where what we can actually do is we can use Private Link in conjunction with something called a service endpoint to make sure that our services in Azure are only accessible from our equipment inside Azure itself, rather than having to access it directly over the internet. Right, so let's go and check this out with a whiteboard demo first. We're going to draw out something, and then what I've drawn out, I'm actually going to go off and build to show you how this actually all functions. So let's get straight into it. Right, so why do we want an Azure Private Link? Well, let's imagine we've got something inside our environment here. Let's go imagine if we have a storage account, okay? A standard storage account inside Azure. And inside this storage account, we're going to have some data. Say, for example, in this case, it's going to be a JPEG image, okay? And we want to go and access this JPEG image, or PNG or SVG, whatever your preferred imaging format is, from a different service. Maybe we have over here a virtual machine, okay? And this virtual machine is because it's Azure, has a VNIC, and this VNIC is going to be attached to a VNet in our environment. And maybe I've got an application that's actually running inside this virtual machine. And maybe this application, or web browser, if you want to be really simple with this, wants to go and access that JPEG that's sitting inside an Azure Storage Account. Now this all kind of lives inside our, well, big Azure cloud bubble here. And you would kind of think that since both of these things are inside Azure, that this application would jump straight to that store. But that's not entirely true. What actually kind of happens with this is this application, because the connection to the JPEG itself is actually via HTTPS, because everything's a REST API nowadays, this is actually not going inside Azure. This is kind of bouncing out like that. It's acting essentially as an external connection. That's perfectly fine, because we might have other services that might need this. Say we want to go out to some other cloudy type service over here, maybe some big box Amazon stuff, and maybe there's an application in AWS that actually wants to access that JPEG as well. Having the ability to do that over HTTPS is great. But what about if that's not what we want? We only actually want access from this internal service. Now, what we could do with this is we could use a couple of technologies, okay? The first thing we can actually go off and use is something called a service endpoint, okay? And what we do with a service endpoint is we configure that actually directly here on this VNet, and it's a little magical link. We've got service endpoints for a multitude of different services in Azure, like cognitive services and SQL services, and in this case storage as well. If I enable here this magical service endpoint inside this Azure VNet, and it's called Microsoft Storage or service.storage. You'll see it in the demo in a second anyway. What this will do is it means it will take any traffic from my current virtual network that's looking for the Azure storage structure and pipe it internally through Azure. Now that's nice, and it still uses what looks like the existing HTTPS connections, but we can go a little bit further with this as well. Maybe, for example, we wanted to treat this storage account kind of like just another file server, and to do that we need to give it an IP address. So what we can do is we can take Azure Private Link. Now Azure Private Link, we're actually going to go and configure that on the storage account itself over here. We're going to move this magical icon down here. And what Azure Private Link will do is it will essentially give this storage account a NIC. Okay, we'll give it a nice little VNIC thanks to Private Link, and we can then connect it to our VNet. And because of that, this VNIC will get an IP address in the same range that this virtual machine is getting an IP address from, because it's connected to the same VNet, or more specifically, the same subnet that the actual VM is connected to as well. So what that's going to mean is if we now sit inside here, inside this virtual machine, and we go and access that JPEG account, it's going to go across that JPEG file, it's going to go across this IP address, and we will see an internal IP for access. If on the other hand we're out here on the internet, we could still actually go and access that storage account to retrieve that JPEG, but what we would end up seeing is an external IP address of Azure that's coming out of Azure's gateway services. What we can also do on here though is to secure this a little bit further. We can kind of stop this external connection. And to stop this external connection, we can go into this storage account again, and we can go to the firewall of this storage account. It's not really a firewall, it's just kind of a restriction. And we could basically say, look, I'm going to stop all traffic coming from anywhere else, so anything externally here, and I'm only going to allow traffic from this specific VNet inside the environment. And by doing that combination of private links and that combination of an Azure firewall setting to say that this specific VNet is A-OK, we've essentially restricted our storage account to only being accessible from internal applications running on internal VMs, or they could be existing PaaS applications that are connected through this specific VNet. So let's go check out how this works in the demo. I'm just going to go and create a new resource group here called Storage Test, and we're going to dump this into East US. Okay. So once we've done that, we're going to actually go and build out a virtual network to connect some stuff to get to kind of the same similar thing that I drew out in the diagram here. So we're going to pop into virtual networks. We're going to go and create a new VNet inside here. And we're just going to call this virtual network storage VM test, which is fine. Okay. I'm going to go next on that one, and we're going to enable the Azure Bastion server because we're going to need it to just very quickly connect to a VNet in a moment. Okay. So the Bastion servers, as you saw in previous demos, do actually take a while to deploy, but they've got faster over recent years. Originally, Bastion servers took about 40 minutes to deploy. It was crazy. So while that's doing its thing, let's go and build out a virtual machine as well. So we're going to build out a virtual machine here, and this virtual machine is going to access the storage account. It's going to access stuff inside the storage account itself. So again, build out a very basic one. We're going to use that existing resource group of storage test, and we're going to use the name of storage VM for this virtual machine. We're going to leave it in East US, that's fine. We don't need any infrastructure redundancy for this one at all, but what we do want is we want this to run Windows Server 2022 Data Center Edition. You can use hot patch or non-hot patch. If you haven't experienced hot patch yet, it's a pretty new thing. It means it's a specialized version of Windows that if it receives Windows updates, it doesn't need to reboot for the most part. Okay, it reduces the amount of reboots that you need. There are still some that you do actually need to reboot with. So we're going to leave the default sizes down here on this, and we're going to use some very basic admin usernames and passwords for this. Let's use that same password as we go. And yes, we do have an existing Windows license. Sure we do. Okay, that's cool. Well, this is all in test anyway. So underneath networking, what we're going to do is going to make sure that this is connected to that storage VNet, the one that I just deployed, which is great. It's connected to that default subnet, which is cool. And we're just going to pop into monitoring and just turn off boot diagnostics. Okay, and then we're going to go off and review and create that. Now we're going to create the storage account component for this too. So let's get this going. Give it a moment. Create. Off it goes. Come on. Submitting deployment. There we go. Okay, so we'll leave that rocking. It's doing the deployment in progress. We're going to go off and look for the storage accounts now, and we're going to go create a storage account for this too. So let's go and build one of these. And we will call this storage account, we'll call it storage test, but I need to add something unique on the end of this. So I'll call this banana, storage test banana. Come on. There we go. Because this needs to be unique in the entirety of Azure, not just in my tenants, because this is going to form part of the URL that's used to access the storage account here on Azure. We're going to make sure that's in the right resource group inside the storage test resource group, and we're just going to swap this redundancy around to locally redundant storage. just because we don't need any of the extras on that. We'll leave it on standard, that's perfectly fine. And we're just going to go off and review and create that. Everything else should be okay inside here. Come on, validation in progress. Very good. Okay, so now those are still building. We're going to need some data to go and put into this storage account to demo accessing this data in a couple of different ways. So let's go do something very quick and easy. Let's go to images.bing.com. And inside here, let's go and search for banana. Okay. And let's go and take a picture of a banana. There we go, that's a good one. That'll do fine. So we're going to save this image of this banana as banana.png, and we'll just chuck that directly onto the desktop at the moment. Okay. So that's all good. I promise you this is going somewhere. Bear with me with pictures of bananas and bear with me with what we're actually doing. Okay. So we need to go back over to our storage account now, and we need to do a couple of little tweaks. Now, what Microsoft did from a security perspective recently, and say recently as the point I'm recording this, is, or as I'm saying this, they changed the security settings around to lock these things down a little bit more. So I can't do anonymous access until I turn on anonymous access now. So here underneath configurations, what we need to go and do is change the allow blob to anonymous access, this one here. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Sometimes this doesn't take. If it doesn't for you, you just got to give it a minute and it will get there. So let's go into containers and let's go add a container down here. There we go. We can do anonymous access down here. We're going to do this to container level, and we're going to call this container fruit at the moment. I'm doing it for anonymous access because I don't want to overcomplicate the demo with extra things like SAS keys inside here and extra security. We're literally just showing off the storage endpoints or the private endpoints here, okay, to show how that works. So we're going to pop into fruit now. We're just going to upload our fruit. Now this could be any data. Of course, you're not just going to store pictures of fruit inside your storage account here. This is going to be things like customer data, JSON files, whatever it might be for your organization. It's just very easy to access this to show you it works. So if you look at this banana.jpg, for example, you'll notice it actually has a URL hooked up to it. And if we just pop up Notepad to have a look at that URL, there is my storage test banana, the name that I had before, .blob.core.windows.net /fruit, the name of the container, and /banana.png. So if you take that and throw that into a web browser, you'll be able to access the picture of the banana retrieved off that storage account. Very good. The storage account is currently public, accessible to the internet, which is why I was able to do that through the web browser. So what I want to do is I want to tweak this a little bit further. Let's go back to the virtual networks down here, and inside this virtual network for storage VNet, what I want to do is I want to go to this service endpoint section, and I want to go and add the Microsoft storage to this. So let's go into this service endpoints over here. We're going to click add, and we're going to go and add the service for Microsoft storage. Notice there's a whole bunch of other services down here like Active Directory, Cosmos DB, Cognitive, which is all the Azure AI stuff down there as well. But we're just choosing storage at the moment. So this is going to be linking through to my default subnet here on this virtual network. So it's going to be mapping that through. Whoops, I accidentally clicked on the learn thing there. I didn't want to do that. We're going to go and add that in. I need to go back now to my storage account and into the private endpoint from the storage account. So let's go back into storage test banana, and let's go back into somewhere down here. Should be able to find security networking. That's good. We can go into networking here, and we can go into private endpoint connections. There we go. So let's go and add in a private endpoint, and we should be able to see there's our resource group of storage test, which is great. We're going to name the instance the storage private endpoint, and this is going to create a NIC for it. This is going to create that IP address. Well, the IP address needs to get welded to a NIC. So let's go next to the resources, and the target sub-resource is actually going to be blob storage for us, what we've just checked out. So let's go back into virtual networks, and this is going to attach to that default subnet inside my environment. We're going to receive an IP address automatically from this, which is fine. We're going to make sure it's definitely connected to that. Let's drop into DNS. We don't need any tags inside here at the moment. We're going to leave some private DNS registration turned on. So yeah, tags, we don't need any of those. Let's go review and create that. So now what we've done is we've created a private endpoint, and we've created that private link, and there's also a NIC that's been attached to our storage account to kind of isolate it from the outside world. Let's go and create this. If I drop back over here though, just to prove the point, if I go into the storage test resource group here, you'll actually see there is the storage private endpoint, and there's also a private link, private DNS zone that's been created for this as well, on top of here to control all the DNS structures for it. So now we can see there's also a NIC created for this, storage private endpoint NIC, and that's been essentially welded to this storage test banana inside here. So what I want to do now is I want to go and connect to my storage virtual machine and see if we can sort of access some resources in here. So let's jump into the VM itself. Hopefully at this point the Bastion server has also deployed, so we should be able to connect via Bastion. Give it a moment. Give it a moment. Come on. Come on, Bastion. You've deployed. All right, cool. So let's go and log in with that. Those details that I used before. I need to allow pop-ups as well. And let's allow all of that through. So if I have a look back at my storage test banana, remember we had this URL. So we're going to copy that URL. We're going to paste that URL inside there. We can still see our fruit banana here. This is still accessible externally. But if I go here into my storage VM, let's just go and see if my storage virtual machine can actually access this as well. So let's go and start without your data. That's cool. Confirm and continue. Continue that is data. Yes, yes. Just give me a web browser, please. So let's go and throw that inside here. So inside the virtual machine that's running on the same network as the storage account, I've got access to Banana. But let's go check something else out. Let's just do a quick command prompt inside here, which is inside the virtual machine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an NS lookup for that. So, whoops, let's take the full URL off the end of it. Notice I'm getting 10.0.0.5 because it's going over the local connection. Whereas over here, which is CMD, which is accessing this banana.jpg over the internet to that storage account, and I do an NS lookup here, what do I get? Whoops. Gotta take off the details. Just skim back over here, take that off a bit, NS lookup that. Notice this is going over the internet. So at the moment, the storage account is accessible both internally and externally. But let's shut off the external. So let's go and secure this. So let's drop back over to the storage virtual machine here, not storage virtual machine, sorry, the storage test banana storage account. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go down into networking, and we're going to change the public network access to say not enabled from all networks, but enabled from selected virtual networks and IP addresses. This is putting on a firewall, as they put it. I mean, I don't really think it's too much of a firewall, but still, there is a private endpoint connection here. That's the one that we're connecting through, which is irrelevant from this location here. We can go and add an existing virtual network to this, and we can say that anything from this virtual network can actually still use this, and anything from this subnet can actually still use this. So if I look inside the virtual machine that's attached to that VNet, refresh, I got access to my banana. But if I'm outside of that virtual machine, accessing externally, I've got authorization failure.
And you know the routine, hashtag like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me next time. Goodbye.